At 9:43 on a Friday night, the HOA switched on 12 stadium lights behind my house and erased every star above my telescope. I had been tracking a faint comet for nearly an hour. The sky over my backyard was clear, cold, and black the way it only gets in the high desert after a day of wind. My telescope was pointed low over the eastern ridge. I had a notebook open beside me, my camera running this spin, and a group of 3 local high school students waiting quietly behind the observatory fence. Then the lights came on. Not porch lights, not security lights. 12 LED floodlights mounted on steel poles 26 feet high. They fired across the new pickleball courts Briar Creek HOA had built along my western property line, turning the whole back end of my lot white. The telescope screen went gray. The comet disappeared. The students stood there looking at me as if I could put the stars back. My name is Evelyn Hart. I was 58 years old, retired from a career designing optical systems for satellite imaging equipment, and I had lived outside Santa Fe for 16 years. The house I owned was small by New Mexico standards. Adobe walls, a flat roof, a walled courtyard out front, a backyard large enough for a garden, a small studio, and the private observatory I built after my husband died. The observatory was not a business. I did not charge people to use it. I did not call myself an astronomer for a living. But I had spent years teaching neighborhood kids how to find planets, helping a local science club photograph meteor showers, and letting students use my telescope when they needed images for school projects. It was my quiet place. My husband, Mark, had helped me pour the concrete pad for it. He had held the flashlight while I ran the first electrical conduit. He had laughed when I told him I needed a motorized dome because the sky does not wait for a woman with a ladder. After he passed, the observatory became more than a hobby. It was where I went when the house felt too still. The Briar Creek HOA knew that. Everybody in the neighborhood knew that. For years, the entrance sign to Briar Creek had advertised the subdivision as desert living with protected night skies. The HOA covenants required exterior lighting to be shielded downward. The rules said fixtures could not cast direct glare onto neighboring homes. The architectural guidelines specifically mentioned preserving the natural dark sky character of the community. Those rules existed because Briar Creek sat on the edge of a low ridge beyond the city, where you could still see the Milky Way on a clear night, or at least you could, until Linda Carver decided the neighborhood needed pickleball courts. It started with a flyer. The HOA announced that it had approved a wellness and recreation improvement project on the common lot behind my house. The project included 2 pickleball courts, benches, a walking path, landscaping, and appropriate safety lighting. I did not object to the courts. I wrote that clearly in my first email. People deserved a place to play. The common lot was theirs. It did not touch my property line except along the western fence. If they wanted courts, they could build courts. But I asked for one thing: shield the lights, keep them low, use the timers, follow the dark sky rules already printed in the covenants. Linda replied the next day, "Evain, the board appreciates your interest in this amenity. Lighting design will meet all community standards." That sounded reasonable. Then the construction plans appeared. The poles were taller than the roof of my house. The fixtures were aimed diagonally across the courts and directly toward my observatory, and the scheduled hours ran until 1:00 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays. I called Linda. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Evain, I was just about to call you. Have you seen the lighting plan?" "Yes. The poles are 26 feet high. They are standard recreational fixtures. They are aimed at my backyard. They are aimed at the courts. From my property. The beam enters the observatory dome. Shisai, you have to understand. Residents need safe visibility after work. I understand that. I'm asking for shielded fixtures. The contractor assures us that the lighting is compliant. Compliant with what? With the project requirements. That is not an answer. Her voice became patient in the way people speak when they want you to feel unreasonable. Evain. We cannot redesign a community project around one homeowner's hobby. I look through the window at the observatory. It is not a hobby when you are shining commercial-grade floodlights into someone's property. It is not commercial-grade lighting. It is a 12-pole recreation system. Please do not exaggerate. I hung up before I said something I would regret. The courts were built over the next 6 weeks. At first, I tried to stay calm. I documented every step. I photographed the poles before the fixtures were installed. I saved the original HOA announcement. I downloaded the covenants. I printed the architectural guidelines. I asked the county planning office whether the project required a lighting plan. The woman at the planning desk told me the common lot was subject to a conditional use approval from years earlier because it bordered rural residential properties. I asked what that meant. She said, "It means the HOA may have additional conditions for lighting, drainage, parking, and noise." That got my attention. I requested the file. The file was old. Most of it had been scanned from paper records. There were maps, meeting notes, drainage drawings, and a list of conditions the developer had accepted before Briar Creek was ever built. Condition 14 said all recreational lighting had to be fully shielded, downward directed, and designed to avoid light spill onto adjoining residential parcels. Condition 15 said any lighting visible from surrounding rural lots had to be off by 1000 p.m. I read those two conditions over and over. They were not HOA suggestions. They were part of the county approval that allowed Briar Creek to build shared amenities on that lot. I emailed Linda again. This time, I attached the conditions. I wrote that the planned poles appeared inconsistent with the county requirements and asked the board to meet with the contractor before installation. Linda did not respond. Instead, the next HOA newsletter included a short paragraph under Community Updates. It said, "The new pickleball facility is on schedule despite a small number of complaints from residents resistant to neighborhood improvements." No name, but everyone knew who she meant. The lights went live on a Thursday evening in October. I had not received any notice. I found out because I was watering my garden after dinner when the whole back fence suddenly glowed blue-white. I turned around and saw the first bank of lights flicker on, then the second, then the third. The courts looked like a small airport runway had landed behind my house. I walked to the western fence. The fixtures were not shielded in any meaningful way. Each one had a broad, glaring face aimed down at the court. But the spill carried far beyond the boundary. The light reflected off the pale gravel, bounced against my adobe wall, and poured through the narrow gap around the observatory dome. I took photographs. Then I took measurements. I owned a light meter because I had used one for years in optical work. It was not some complicated laboratory machine. It measured illuminance, the amount of light falling on a surface. At the observatory entrance, the reading was 4 lux. Inside the open dome, it was 3 lux. For casual outdoor lighting, those numbers might not sound enormous. For long exposure astronomy, they were devastating. The light did not just make the sky brighter. It ruined the contrast my telescope needed to capture faint objects. That Friday night was the first time the courts were officially open. The HOA held a ribbon cutting at sunset. There were food trucks near the clubhouse, music by the pool, and a line of residents waiting to play. Linda stood near the net in a bright red jacket, smiling for photographs. Atop 13. I walked over with my light meter, the county conditions, and a printed copy of the covenants. I asked if we could speak privately. She looked at the papers in my hand and said, "No." "Yes." She stepped away from the crowd. I showed her the readings. I showed her the condition requiring downward shielding and no spill onto neighboring lots. I said, "The fixtures are violating the county approval. I need you to turn them off until the contractor corrects them." She looked at the meter. Then she looked at me. "Evain, nobody is shutting down the opening night because you brought a gadget. It is a calibrated light meter, and the courts are full. That does not make the lights legal." She folded her arms. "Your telescope is not the center of this neighborhood." "I never said it was. You are asking hundreds of people to lose an amenity because you do not like light. I am asking you to follow the conditions your HOA agreed to." She leaned closer. "Do you know what this project cost?" "No." $280,000. Residents have been waiting more than a year. We are not taking it apart because you want a darker backyard." I looked at the courts. The players were laughing. Paddles cracked against balls. Children ran along the fence. Nobody there knew the problem was not the game. It was the way Linda had built it. I said, "I am giving you a chance to fix it before I file a complaint." She smiled without warmth. "Do whatever you think you need to do." Then she walked back toward the ribbon-cutting crowd. At no 43. Those 12 lights came on at full output. The comet vanished from my telescope. The students went home early. And when I checked my email at midnight, I found a violation notice from Briar Creek HOA. The notice said I had created a hostile environment at a community event. The fine was $200. It also warned that any further disruption of the pickleball facility could result in suspension of my access to HOA amenities. I was not even a member of the HOA. My house sat outside Briar Creek. They had fined me for objecting to lights shining onto my property. That was the moment I stopped treating Linda Carver's project like a bad design decision. She had made it personal, and the county file in my hand was about to show me just how careless she had been. The next morning, I called the county planning office before the lights had even gone off. The woman who answered remembered my records request from a few weeks earlier. When I told her the project had been completed with 12 unshielded 26-foot poles aimed toward my property, she asked whether I had photographs. "I have photographs." I said, "I have light meter readings, the county conditions, and an HOA fine for objecting." There was a pause. Then she said, "Please send everything you have. I'm opening a complaint file." I spent most of that Saturday building a record. I did not write an angry email. I did not post in the Briar Creek Facebook group. I did not stand by the fence and shout at people playing pickleball. I documented. I took photographs from the observatory entrance every 15 minutes while the lights were on. I photographed the beam striking my adobe wall. I photographed the glare visible through the dome opening. I recorded the light meter readings at the property line, the observatory door, and inside the dome. I measured the height of the poles using the installation drawings and the contractor's own specifications. I saved a copy of the HOA violation notice. Then I made a short video showing something that mattered more than the numbers. I started with the clear night sky above my backyard before the lights came on. You could see the stars, the ridge line, and the open observatory dome. Then, At 9:43. The fixtures fired up. The entire scene changed in less than 5 seconds. The trees became silhouettes against a white sky. The observatory wall glowed. The camera exposure shifted automatically because the glare was so strong, even without knowing anything about astronomy. Anyone watching could understand the problem. I sent it all to the county. On Monday, Linda sent me another letter. This one came from the HOA attorney. It said Briar Creek denied that the lighting violated any covenant or county requirement. It claimed the fixtures were professionally installed, necessary for safety, and consistent with reasonable recreational use. The letter also demanded that I pay the $200 fine within 10 days. Marissa Vale called me after she read it. Evain, are you subject to their HOA declaration? No. Do you own any property inside Briar Creek? No. Do you use their pool? Clubhouse, walking trails, or other amenities? No. Then they have no authority to fine you. I said. That was my thought. Marissa laughed softly. I think Linda is counting on you being too annoyed to check. Can we make her check? Yes. She sent a response that afternoon. It explained that I was not a member of Briar Creek HOA, was not bound by its declaration, and had no obligation to pay any purported fine. It also stated that the fine itself was evidence of retaliatory conduct after I raised concerns about a county-approved lighting condition. Linda's attorney did not reply, but the county did. An inspector named Rafael Molina came out on Thursday night. Just before the courts opened, he was younger than I expected. Maybe early 40s. With a reflective vest, a clipboard, and his own light meter. He met me at my gate at off 30. I showed him the county approval conditions, the photographs, the original design drawings I had downloaded, and the light readings I had taken. Then he walked with me to the observatory. At 9:43. The lights came on. He did not say anything at first. He stood by the dome entrance, looked toward the courts, and took several measurements. Then he walked to the property line and took more. The players did not know who he was. Linda did. I saw her step out from the court area and stare across the fence. A few minutes later, she came over. Can I help you? She asked Rafael. He introduced himself. Linda smiled. Of course. We are proud of this facility. I'm reviewing a lighting compliance complaint. The lighting is professionally designed. Do you have the approved photometric plan? Linda hesitated. I believe the contractor has it. The county file includes a plan. Rafael said, I would like to compare it with the installed fixtures. Linda looked at the light poles. Then she said, I'm sure they match. Rafael did not argue. He simply wrote something on his clipboard. The next day, the county sent a request to Briar Creek HOA, requiring it to provide the final lighting plan, fixture specifications, contractor invoices, and any approved field changes from the original permit. The HOA had 5 business days. On the 5th day, Linda sent the county a packet. Marissa got a copy because she had filed the complaint. The packet included a lighting design from a company called Desert Night Recreation Systems. It showed 8 15-foot poles with full cutoff fixtures. The plan used lower wattage lights angled directly downward over the courts. It also included shielding diagrams and a note stating that no direct light could spill onto adjoining residential parcels. That was not what Briar Creek had built. They had built 12 26-foot poles. They had used wider fixtures. and several were mounted at angles that sent the light directly over the fence. The county inspector noticed it too. Raphael sent the HOA a follow-up question. Please explain the discrepancy between the approved plan and installed conditions. Linda's answer was almost impressive in its confidence. She claimed the final configuration had been adjusted in the field for player safety and evolving recreation needs. The county asked for the approved field change request. There was none. Then Raphael contacted Desert Night Recreation Systems directly. That was when the story changed. The company's project manager told the county that Desert Night had submitted the original plan but had not been hired to install the final system. According to him, Linda Carver had canceled their contract 2 weeks before installation. She said Briar Creek had found a more cost-effective local provider. That local provider was called Southwest Community Lighting. The owner was Richard Carver, Linda's husband. He had installed taller poles, cheaper fixtures, and more lights than the approved plan allowed. He had saved the HOA roughly $38,000 on the original quote. Then he billed Briar Creek another $19,000 for custom safety upgrades. The board had approved the invoice. The homeowner association had paid more for a system that did not comply with the county conditions, damaged neighboring property rights, and ruined the one thing the original covenants promised to protect. Dark sky. I read the invoices at Marissa's office. There were emails too. One came from a board member named Martin Hale. He had asked Linda why the pole height had changed from 15 feet to 26. Linda replied that taller poles would provide better court coverage and avoid unnecessary special accommodation for Evelyn's telescope. That email was dated 3 days before the installation. She knew the lights would spill into my yard. She knew the original plan had been designed to prevent that, and she had chosen the cheaper contractor because she wanted a project that looked bigger and brighter than the county approved. Marissa asked whether I wanted to sue. For a few seconds, I imagined it. I imagined asking for damages. I imagined demanding that every pole come down. I imagined Linda sitting in a room while someone read her own email out loud. But I had not filed the complaint to win money. I filed it because I wanted the lights off my house. So I told Marissa, give them one chance. She sent Linda and the HOA a demand letter. It gave them 14 days to shut down the non-compliant lights, remove the unapproved fixtures, install the shielded system in the approved county plan, withdraw the false HOA fine, and reimburse the cost of my light assessment and legal review. The letter also informed them that the county could suspend use of the facility if the violation was not corrected. Linda did not take the chance. Instead, the HOA held a special meeting. I attended this one. The room was packed with residents holding paddles, folding chairs, and printed copies of the county complaint. Linda stood at the front beside Richard, who had a stack of contractor papers in front of him. She began by saying the HOA had been targeted by a single homeowner attempting to dictate recreational policy for the entire neighborhood. Then she looked directly at me. Mrs. Hart believes her private observatory should limit what 400 families can enjoy. I stood up. I believe your HOA should follow the county approval it agreed to. Linda said, the courts are safe. The lighting is safe. The county conditions are being interpreted differently than you want them interpreted. I held up the original approved lighting plan. This says 8 shielded 15-foot poles. You installed 12 unshielded 26-foot poles. Richard leaned into his microphone. The installed system meets industry safety standards. Then why did you submit a different plan to the county? The room went quiet. Linda answered for him. Because the original plan was not sufficient for evening play. Then you should have applied to change it. She looked at the residents. Evelyn wants the courts closed. I said, no, I want the lights fixed. That was the truth. But Linda had already chosen her story. She told everyone the board would not give in to intimidation. She said the courts would remain open. She said the HOA would defend its right to provide amenities. The meeting ended with applause from some residents and silence from others. As I walked out, Celeste Warren caught up with me in the parking lot. I read the county conditions. She said quietly, "You're right. I know. Linda is telling people you want the whole project removed." I told her exactly how to fix it. Celeste looked back toward the clubhouse. She does not want to admit she used Richard's company. "No," I said. "She wants the lights to become too popular to change." The next Friday night, the courts were busier than ever. Linda had organized a pickleball mixer. Food trucks came. The HOA set up music near the clubhouse. More than 60 cars lined the side streets. At no patruzeci trei. The 12 lights came on. I stood inside my observatory with my camera ready. Raphael had told me the county would conduct one final unannounced inspection before deciding whether to issue formal enforcement. I did not know when it would happen. I only knew that Linda had been warned. She had been given the plans. She had been given the measurements. She had been given 14 days to correct the problem. And she had chosen to make the violation bigger. Then, at 1011 that night, 3 county vehicles pulled into Briar Creek Estates. Raphael stepped out with 2 inspectors. One went to the light poles. One went to the clubhouse office. And the third walked directly toward the electrical control cabinet that Richard Carver had installed behind the courts. That was when Linda finally understood the lights were not the only part of her project the county wanted to inspect. The county inspectors stayed at Briar Creek for almost 3 hours. At first, most of the players kept going. Pickleball has a strange way of making people ignore everything except the next ball. A few residents looked worried when they saw the county trucks. But the courts were booked. The lights were on. And Linda had spent weeks telling everyone the complaint was just one homeowner trying to stop a community amenity. Then the electrical inspector opened the cabinet behind Court 2. That changed the mood. He was an older man named Bernard Shaw. He wore a reflective vest over a denim shirt, carried a flashlight, and moved with the slow confidence of someone who had spent his career looking inside panels. Other people hoped nobody would inspect. Richard stood beside him. Linda stood 10 feet away, arms folded tightly across her chest. Bernard removed the lower cover from the control cabinet and checked the labels on the breakers. He followed the conduit into the ground, checked the wire gauge, and compared the installed system with the permit file on his tablet. Then he asked Richard, "Who pulled the electrical permit?" Richard said, "The lighting contractor handled the installation." Bernard looked up. "Who pulled the permit?" Richard cleared his throat. "The project was part of the larger recreation improvement." "That is not an answer." Linda stepped forward. "There may be some paperwork delay. The board approved the lighting system." Bernard closed the panel door. "Board approval is not an electrical permit." He showed Raphael the screen on his tablet. "Raphael, read it." Then walked toward the closest pole with a measuring device. The county had issued a site permit for the pickleball courts, but no electrical permit had ever been pulled for the 12-pole lighting system. The approved design called for 8 shielded 15-foot poles. The installed system used 12 26-foot poles with different fixture models and a different electrical load. It was not an adjustment. It was a different project. Bernard checked the pole nearest my property line. The fixture's LED array was visible from the observatory. The beam angle crossed the fence, hit the pale adobe wall behind my dome, and continued into the open sky. Raphael took a photograph. Then he took another from inside my observatory yard. Linda watched him do it. "This is ridiculous." she said. The lights are for public safety. Raphael did not look up from his clipboard. Safety lighting still has to follow the approval conditions. The courts are full. That does not change the conditions. The community spent $280,000 on this project. That does not change the conditions. Linda's face tightened. You are really going to close down a community facility because Evelyn cannot see stars. Raphael looked at her for the first time. I am requiring the HOA to stop operating unpermitted electrical equipment and non-compliant lighting. Your county approval requires fully shielded fixtures with no light spill onto adjoining properties. The installed system does not meet that requirement. He handed her a notice. The notice required Briar Creek to shut off the court lights immediately. It gave the HOA 30 days to submit a correction plan. Obtain proper permits, and prove that any replacement system met the original dark sky conditions. The courts could remain open during daylight, but after sunset, the lights had to stay off. Linda read the notice twice. Then she looked toward Richard. Richard did not say anything. The players had started to gather near the gate. Someone asked whether the county was shutting down the courts. Another person asked why the lights had been installed without permits. A man I had never met said this was all happening because that telescope lady had complained. I took a breath. Then I walked toward the group. I did not ask for the courts to close. I said, I asked for the HOA to use the lighting plan the county already approved. The man looked at me. What plan? I held up a copy of the original design. 8 shielded poles, 15 feet tall. Lights aimed down. No glare into homes. That was the plan your HOA was supposed to build. A woman near the back asked Linda, why didn't we build that? Linda answered quickly, the original plan was not adequate for safe evening play. I said, then you should have applied to change it. The woman looked at the county inspector. Could they have done that? Raphael answered before Linda could. Yes. They could have applied for a revised plan. The county would have reviewed the new design and notified adjoining property owners. That was the point where people stopped looking at me. They started looking at Linda. Richard walked to the electrical cabinet with his key. For a few seconds, he stood there staring at the breakers. The lights still blazed over the courts. The glare still covered the observatory wall. Every second they stayed on seemed to make the situation more embarrassing. Finally, he turned the master switch. The courts went dark. There were complaints. A few people groaned. One teenager yelled that the HOA had ruined the Friday night tournament. I understood the frustration. The players had not installed the poles. They had not ignored the permit. They had not filed a false fine against me for asking questions. But as the glare faded, something else happened. The sky opened up. The ridge behind Briar Creek went black again. The pale wash of light vanished from the observatory dome. A handful of stars appeared over the courts. Then more as our eyes adjusted. It was quiet for a moment. Then a little boy standing beside his mother pointed upward. Mom, he said. Is that the Milky Way? She looked up. I think it is. That was the first thing anyone said that night that made me smile. The county compliance meeting happened 2 weeks later. Briar Creek was required to send its board, property manager, lighting contractor, and any engineer involved in the project. I attended with Marissa Vale. But I did not say much. I did not need to. The documents did the work. The original county plan, the installed fixture specifications, the pole height records, the light measurements, the electrician's report, the invoice from Southwest Community Lighting, and the email Linda had sent before construction began. The email was the worst document in the whole file. Martin Hale, one of the board members, had asked why the pole height had changed from 15 feet to 26. He had written that the original dark sky plan seemed safer for nearby homes and asked whether the board needed another county review. Linda had replied, "The original design over-accommodates Evelyn Hart's telescope. Richard's proposal provides better coverage at a lower total cost. We need to stop letting one person dictate what this community can build." That was her mistake. Not because it made her sound unkind, because it proved she knew the approved design was meant to limit spill light onto my property. She had not overlooked the condition. She had chosen to ignore it. The county gave Briar Creek a choice. The HOA could remove all 12 poles and submit a new lighting application from the beginning, or it could retrofit the courts to match the original approved dark sky plan. That meant removing 4 poles, lowering the remaining 8, replacing every fixture, adding full cutoff shields, installing a new control panel, obtaining an electrical permit, and programming the lights to shut off by 1000 p.m. The new board, which had taken over after Linda resigned, chose the retrofit. It cost $87. Sube. That was more than twice the amount Linda claimed Richard had saved by replacing the original plan with his own design. The county also imposed permit and inspection fees. The HOA had to pay for a licensed lighting engineer to create a photometric study proving that no direct glare crossed the property line. And because Richard's company had installed the system without a permit, the HOA's insurance carrier refused to cover the portion of the loss connected to the unauthorized electrical work. The financial review became impossible to avoid. Celeste Warren, the retired principal who had questioned Linda at the earlier meeting, was appointed interim president. Her first action was to hire an independent accountant. The accountant reviewed every invoice from Southwest Community Lighting. Richard's company had billed Briar Creek $57. $400 for the installed lighting system. Almost $19,000 of that total was listed as custom safety enhancement and field adjustment. There was no separate work order, no board vote approving it, no engineering report, no conflict of interest disclosure showing that the company belonged to Linda's husband. The HOA had paid more for a system that broke the county rules, created a safety issue, and turned the courts into a legal problem. The new board terminated Richard's contract. Linda resigned from the HOA completely. Neither of them made a public apology, but the board did. Celeste came to my observatory one evening as the retrofit work began. The old poles had already been removed. The court area looked strange without them. There were holes in the pavement where the bases had been, coils of wire near the fence, and a contractor's truck parked by the clubhouse. Celeste stood outside the dome and looked toward the sky. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You didn't build the lights. I voted for the project budget. I did not ask enough questions." I respected that answer. Most people apologize for the part they did not control. Celeste apologized for the part she should have checked. I never wanted people to lose their courts. I said, "I know. I said that from the beginning. I know that now." She handed me a folder. Inside was a settlement agreement. The HOA would withdraw the false violation notice. It would acknowledge that I was not a member of Briar Creek and had never been subject to HOA fines. It would reimburse my light assessment. Legal review. Observatory equipment, repair, and the student events I had canceled because the glare made observation impossible. The amount was $21. Sanbei. The board also agreed to hold 2 annual public astronomy nights on the clubhouse lawn. During those evenings, the corrected court lights would remain off, and I would bring telescopes for residents and students. I looked at Celeste. "Whose idea was that?" "Mine," she said. I think the neighborhood needs to see what it almost lost. I signed the agreement. The new lights were installed in early spring. They were lower. They were shielded. They aimed straight down onto the courts. From my observatory, I could hear the soft crack of paddles and the occasional laugh, but I could not see the bulbs themselves. P.M. The system dimmed and shut off automatically. The first night it happened, I stood inside the observatory with 3 students from the local science club. One of them was a girl named Mia. She had been there the night the original floodlights came on and erased the comet from the telescope screen. This time, she leaned toward the eyepiece and gasped. "What is that?" "Saturn," I said. She looked again. "The rings are real. They are behind us." The corrected court lights faded off. The sky darkened. And for the first time in months, nothing brightened my backyard except the stars. Linda thought my observatory was a private hobby that should be sacrificed for a larger community project. She was wrong. The dark sky condition was never about protecting one telescope. It was about honoring the place everyone had chosen to live. You cannot advertise desert nights. Build a neighborhood around open skies, and then act surprised when somebody asks you not to replace the horizon with stadium lights. I did not make Briar Creek choose between pickleball and the stars. I made them follow the rules that allowed them to have both. What would you have done if your HOA built stadium lights beside your backyard observatory? Fined you for speaking up, and then blamed you when the county shut the lights down? Would you have stayed quiet? Or made them live by the same dark sky rules they promised the whole neighborhood? Disclaimer: this is a dramatized storytelling narrative based on real-life HOA and property dispute themes. Names, characters, and specific circumstances are fictionalized. Visuals may be generated using AI tools for illustrative purposes only.